evening, Wahad. Welcome, you. You came to get the world from yours truly, the Honest Jew. Welcome back, everybody, to the 15th episode of the Victor News Network. As you have probably seen, last week I haven't recorded, and this may end up being a more common occurrence. Sometimes I need to take some time off, take care of my own stuff, and especially as university work is ramping up. This may be a more common occurrence, especially up until this entire semester will be over. That will be at the beginning of February next year. Plus, there are also the winter vacations coming up over now, and also other stuff that I need preparing. For now, suggestions regarding videos or any other things that may come into your mind are accepted either via the comments of this video or via the email at thehonestjew1@gmail.com, posted on the screen, or on X. The handle is at thehonestjew1. Regarding donations, a willing donor has informed me that for some reason subscribes are sucks complete ours. And so for now on, might I suggest using the Ko-Fi link only. As far as I verified, there is no requirement to make yourself an account there. And when it comes to car payments, depending on your option, it's either a one-time payment or the system in itself just programs it in case you want to do a monthly donation. So at least this is one of the good parts, because for Subscribestar, as far as I remember, you need an account for that. Might I also remind you, please, to like and subscribe this video, share it with people that you think that may find such sort of content interesting. It means a lot to me. And especially to still breach this barrier at the beginning with low viewing numbers and low subscriber numbers. As far as YouTube puts it, if I am below 1,000 subscribers, then the algorithm will just not be looking at all at the video and at the channel in itself, or if it recommends it, to the most dubious people. Like I've seen on one of the episodes, a lot of my viewers came through some sort of a podcast with Sam Hyde. As usual, links and timestamps are in the description. The first news article is one which I honestly did not see a real reason why it should be covered, but since I've seen it not only on Reuters, but I've also seen it on Straits Times, the Singaporean news website. Well, I gotta concede, and probably this is more important for the people across the world than it appears to be. So starting first, Reuters. Moldova Sandu secures knife-edge EU vote win after unfair fight. President Maya Sandu said on Monday Moldovans had won a first battle in a difficult fight for the future, a day after a slim majority of 50.46% backed EU accession in a referendum that was clouded by allegations of Russia-backed meddling. The knife-edge finish was a shock for supporters of Sandu, who had hoped the vote would deliver a firm message of intent to bring the ex-Soviet agriculture economy into the European Union by 2030 and leave Moscow's orbit for good. The people of Moldova have spoken. Our EU future will now be anchored in the Constitution. We fought fairly in an unfair fight, and we won, Sandu wrote on X. The result means a clause will be added to the constitution defining EU accession as a goal. Moldova began the long process of formal accession talks in June. In the presidential election held alongside the referendum, Sandu won 42.45%, short of the 50% needed to win outright, and paving the way for a November 3rd runoff against former Prosecutor General Alexandru Stoyanoglu, who won 25.98%. Earlier, Sandu, 52, had told Moldovans that there was clear evidence that criminal groups backed by foreign forces hostile to our national interests had aimed to buy off 300,000 votes. Criminal groups have attacked our country with tens of millions of euros, lies and propaganda, using the most disgraceful means to keep our citizens and our nation trapped in uncertainty and instability, she said. In the run-up to the vote, authorities said that there had been Moscow-backed meddling attempts spearheaded by fugitive tycoon Ilan Shor, including an effort to bribe 130,000 people to vote no and support a specific candidate at the election. Shor denies wrongdoing. The Kremlin, which denies interfering, denounced the votes in Moldova as unfree, casting doubt on what it said it was a hard-to-explain increase in votes in favor of Sandu and the EU, and challenging her to present evidence of meddling. The EU defended Sandu and said Moldova had faced unprecedented intimidation and foreign interference by Russia and its proxies ahead of this vote. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, welcomed the outcome of the referendum in a post on X. In the face of Russia's hybrid tactics, Moldova shows that it is independent, it is strong, and it wants a European future. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe said the voting campaigns had been marred by foreign interference and active disinformation efforts. White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby said Russia had been actively working to undermine Moldova's election and its European integration. Russia did not succeed, as the results demonstrate. Moldovan democracy is strong, Kirby said, but added that he expected Moscow to try to influence the runoff election. The future of the Southeast European nation of under 3 million has been in the spotlight since Russia's invasion of neighboring Ukraine at a time of mounting confrontation between Moscow and the West. Ties with Moscow have deteriorated as Sandu condemned the invasion and diversified energy supplies away from Russia. Moldova's twin votes came ahead next Saturday's closely contested parliamentary election in Georgia, another former Soviet republic that aspires to join the EU, but which Russia sees as part of its historical sphere of influence. In a speech on Monday, Sandu said that there will still be one more battle to fight, urging Moldovans to back her in the runoff for the presidency. Stoyanoglu, who is backed by the traditionally pro-Russian Party of Socialists, has said that, if elected, he will build a balanced foreign policy involving ties with the EU, the United States, Russia, and China. He boycotted Sunday's referendum, calling it a ruse to boost Sandu's re-election bid. He challenged Sandu to a televised debate ahead of the runoff. Well, in order to get a few things straight regarding as this article says, two elections have actually happened on Sunday last week. First, it was the Moldovan presidential election, and coupled with that, obviously, in order to boost the numbers when it comes to people present, the referendum was also arranged for the same day, which in itself is quite a good tactic, if we are to say it like that. But the reality is that when it comes to the vote in itself, both are pro-Russians, so it's not just Ilan Shor, but there are also other interests. But also the Romanians have played on their respective sides into pulling the referendum in one way or another. And in this case, the effort from Bucharest in, mm, garnering more votes without perjuring myself has succeeded, even if it's with a slim majority. Well, the majority is the majority, and as sufficient people have been present, then we see how the situation ended up. Well, at one point, Moldova will be part of the EU, with all its advantages and disadvantages, mostly disadvantages when it comes to an agricultural country like Moldova. But that remains to be the reality that they will experience when the time will come, with stuff like common agricultural policy hurting in particular agrarian nations like what Moldova is and what Moldova has been, because the Soviets ordained some many decades ago, back in the 60s, that the Moldova will have to be mostly rural, and whatever industrialization happened in the current breakaway Republic of Transnistria, it remains to be seen for them. And as at least the vast majority of people voted, and that slim majority will be getting the EU accession in one way or another. But going back to garnering the votes, what the Russians, or more like the pro-Russians, were more conscious of is that there are about 200,000, if not more, people from Moldova who possess Romanian passports, and you could guess in which way that those people vote. Mm. Exactly. At least based on the last numbers, at least 80% of Moldovan citizens who also possess a Romanian passport, where plenty of them live outside of Romania. About 80% of them voted uh, yes to the EU, to Moldova's accession in the EU. And you can guarantee that the vast majority of those voters actually know what they're into, at least from when it comes to the benefits that they seek. Especially this one, it's not like they didn't have the benefit of free movement because they are possessors of a Romanian passport at the end of the day, but it's also for the rest of the people who do not have per se the money nor the logistics in order to go through the entire process in order to somewhat try by themselves to get the Romanian passport, even though it's a process that has gotten easier and already the structures required for you to comply in order to get a Romanian passport have been for quite a long time. So basically, it's a question of if you really want to, then the information on how to do it is pretty easy to find. You also know what sums of money are involved for this, and it's overall easier. Also, one more thing that is definitely noted more by Moldova than any other country is that with the location it's part of, well, the location in which Moldova finds itself doesn't exactly have too much of a choice realistically when it comes to um, trading with one nation or the other. You have the separatist, you have the separatist republic, which is doing its own thing and it's currently blocking, not like blocking it itself, more like the Ukraine is blockading it from from the western side. And then you have the Romanians, and then you have a tiny port which is actually on the Danube that provides you access to the rest of the world through the Black Sea. And the part with trading, and especially with how much trade is done between Moldova and Romania, that's one of the grander economic aims of the regime in Chisinau. On the other side, when it comes to Maya Sandu, and even if she didn't get 50% in the first presidential runoff, then she isn't exactly far either, because realistically, based on what I've seen, there is no real competition to her. Even if the party that she's part of, here I'm talking about PAS, is a gigantic cesspool of arrogant people and who also tend to be on the younger side. Some of them are members of parliament and they're even younger than me, which is not exactly a beneficial scenario because what exactly do you know realistically about ruling the country when the vast majority of people that voted for you are at least double your age? And things like that. I'm not saying that there is an argument for a minimum age to be part of a parliament, but and I don't deny that there may be individuals who actually know the needs of the common people, and they can actually represent said people. Well, those generations that used to exist, they're not the same as the ones right now. And seeing how the country has been managed both from a presidential point of view and from a parliamentarian point of view, well, it's difficult to make an argument that they succeeded in something, especially since the main focus in the past 2 years and a bit, especially since the war in Ukraine began, and when traditionally Gazprom started choking the Moldovans with absurd prices for natural gas. It did take Moldova quite a while to realize in which way the wind is blowing and who do they have to align with for real this time, and not sit on the sidelines and pretend that everything is all right. And such conflicts, especially since they are also a country bordering directly Ukraine, and the Russian army, leaving aside the army battle group from Transnistria, the Russian army is much closer to them than it is to Romania. And since they fought a civil war in 1990, which did not exactly go that great. There's a reason why Transnistria exists, even if it's an entity that exists without any recognition from anybody, not even from the main sponsor, being Russia. You kind of start seeing which way this is going, and considering the size of the country and considering the fact that, well, foreign policy has never been a strong suit of Moldova because such policy has been decided in the days of the USSR in Moscow. Mm, Here is what I see which is the main reason why the other candidate, the former prosecutor, so Alexander Stoyanoglu, why he lost is that, well, his intention is definitely a good one, but he doesn't have that much backing, and he's sadly not in a country where he can claim that, from a foreign policy perspective, to also to be working essentially with everybody, with the EU, the United States, Russia, and China. Well, sure, you can try that, but what's your capacity as a country to be a mediator between such superpowers? And you're also not in the right context with the world being as polarized as it is. Um, when I read what this guy intends to do, I'm getting memories of Nicolae Ceausescu. The difference is that the world was still a bigger place back when Ceausescu was in power, and even then he speculated masterfully some instances in order to gain something for his own country. Well, one of them being back when there was the Sino-Soviet split. Well, he was the middle ground where both the Soviets and the Chinese were negotiating, and who also had communications, well, essentially by proxy. And in the same way, well, when the US wanted to get closer to China, that was also something that Ceausescu facilitated. But those contexts back then are not the same as the ones right now, and you can't play such cards realistically in the way the current world is, because already those communication channels which did not exist in the past. So that's one thing that Ceausescu exploited. They already exist now, and the world is a much smaller place, especially thanks to resources like the internet and global trade, global communications, and everything else. And considering that we're talking about a former prosecutor, just like it's the same situation as it is with Keir Starmer here in the UK. What sort of foreign policy competence do you have as a prosecutor, or probably you've been to a special school and I'm not aware of. But where exactly is your foreign policy competence when looking at your role as a prosecutor, even if you've done it formally? Where we don't forget what prosecutors do. They seek every possibility in order to get a person charged as guilty. How does this play into into foreign policy, and especially in what you want to do? Especially since Stoyanoglu himself did boycott the referendum in itself, but on the other side, I haven't heard about anything notable that he did when it comes to foreign policy, and especially when it comes to the EU, that's already a given that he cannot piggyback off what Maya Sandu and Paz did, even if their connections are as dubious as ever, which aren't different from the connections other political parties in Eastern Europe have, especially with the political Stiftungen of the Germans, like Friedrich Herber Stiftung, which is from SPD. Then you also have Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, which is part of the CDU, and who knows how many others. That's what this is how politics are played in Europe, and especially when you have such things going on. Be sure that even the Romanians themselves also have their own partnerships with the ruling parties in Moldova because they're the smaller nation and who also happen to be a majority percentage just like us. Even if the Soviets tried really hard to try to convince that nation that it is different, we can see that tricks like those don't work. And when they don't work, you either have a peaceful out, just like what happened in Moldova, or you have a really noisy out, which is also directly proportional to the atrocities that the Soviets committed. You have Ukraine as an example. Notably about Alexander Stoyanoglu, it's pretty funny that he's the guy who is supported the mm, by the Socialist Party in Moldova. So, and here good mention, socialists, not social democrats, because the party which are the Socialists of Moldova are the former communists. In the past, they were called the they're called the Communist Party of the Republic of Moldova, and now they're called the Socialist Party of the Republic of Moldova. But as my colleague Lucian mentioned several times, especially in the Romanian podcast about election in Moldova when he was there in the summer of 2021, the hypocrisy is rife there. But it's not exactly hypocrisy of the good sort of the wrong sort. It's just what it is. You have members of the parliament who claim that they are full communists, but then at the same time they're also hyper religious, with not just one icon inside their office, but with several icons and a really religious guy. And this sort of hypocrisy has also been observant in the former leader, the one who was still the leader of Communist Moldova when it collapsed, Vladimir Voronin, who's still, who's even if he's retired from politics, mm, he still garners a tiny bit of influence within the formerly communist, currently socialist party of the Republic of Moldova. But when it comes to Stoyanoglu, his hypocrisy manifests in much funnier ways. When publicly he says that, we don't align with the EU because that means that we're gonna have to get stuck with them, and this is a position which he doesn't like, considering what he would have intended to do in terms of foreign policy. At the same time, his wife and two daughters are also really good buddies with a lot of high up Western interests, especially his two daughters. One of his daughters is working as part of the European Central Bank, and there are also public pictures on the internet of her and Christine Lagarde. And then his other daughter works for some sort of investment fund in Switzerland, and that's as much as we know. Plus, it's ju just like I would expect any Moldovan politician, because there have been already plenty of sightings of the former big guy in the Socialist Party, and here I'm talking about Igor Dodon. They're making quite a lot of visits, especially to the city of Iași, and especially at a mall called Palace Mall, which, fun fact, it looks pretty close to a smaller sized version of a mall in Dubai, architecture-wise and ornaments-wise. But they go there, and that's where they do their shopping. And let's be honest, especially during every summer, you do find quite a lot of people with Moldovan car plates, not just in the historic region of Moldova itself, but also in Bucharest and other places. And they're not the cheap sort of cars. When you take into consideration that living costs in Chișinău are almost on par as they are in Bucharest, and Bucharest is not exactly Cluj, but it's about well, let's say 75-ish% there. But when you take into consideration that average salaries in Moldova are 3 times lower than they are than the Romanian averages, and when even compared to the median, because this is one argument that I've had with several people. Average salary does not actually matter at all when you look at Romanian statistics, and this is what happens in general in Eastern Europe. You're more interested in the median, but when it comes to Romania, it's a particular scenario because averages are pushed much higher by the concentration of wealth, but also concentration of business in Bucharest, because the law states that if you are a certain company past a certain who has passed a certain valuation, you're obligated to have your headquarters in Bucharest and also run all your financial operations through Bucharest. Romanians definitely know what I'm talking about. It's called the Law of Large Contributors, or Legea Marilor Contribuabili. And by contributors, I mean contributors to the tax coffers. And at the same time, with the structure of the Romanian civil service as it is, uh, the highest concentration happens to be in Bucharest, and those guys are not exactly the sort of people that get paid the peanuts. They get paid significant sums of money, especially since we take in consideration every director or every executive director of a state company, which sometimes makes more, depending upon what the company we're talking about, compared to an equivalent in the private sector. And also another falsehood presented by statistics, and where people who don't pay attention fall into, is that when they take gross salaries as a measurement, which is again complete bollocks, because nobody gets their gross salary ever in that country. If you are an employee, you're getting best case scenario about 54% of that money. So realistically, the situation isn't as rosy as it appears. Sure, probably gross salaries may be comparable to a country like Poland or to a smaller country in Western Europe. But when it comes to net salaries, these are the main things that you need to take into consideration. One is median salary matters more because that gets you the realistic sum of actual everyday Romanians working, and then you get the net amount, not the gross amount. So same, and it's the same situation when it comes to Moldova. So even using these legitimate statistics, the Moldovans still make a lot less on average, and almost as a median than what Romanians do. However, there are some benefits, which is why I'm getting to the back to the point as to why getting into the EU may not be a good idea, especially when the laws steamroller will land against Moldova, or Moldova being a mostly agrarian country. It also has some high quality ingredients, which if you are to find them in Romania, well, partly because of the asshole import fees shoved down the throat by the European Union, they end up they end up being quite expensive purchases in Romania, but still they're so high quality that the consumption of Moldovan products has grown higher and higher. And not to mention that it's not just things like sour cream or milk products or vegetables and fruits. But Moldova also has quite a huge business that may pose a threat to a country which is surprisingly not the Germans, but the French wineries. And with with winemaking being some of the oldest occupations, starting from the Caucasus Mountains, and especially in the current day country of Georgia, it was obvious that one winemaking would have moved with the westwards, especially with the Roman Empire catching up to the fact that well, hold on, we're not the only guys who are winemakers and who like to drink wine, but there are also some people east of us who like to make and drink them, and who also have really good soil to do such a thing. Even though back then, what was it? Well, the current region which Georgia is part of was part of Scythia, and Scythia was almost all the way towards Moldova now. But as an occasional consumer of wines from the Caucasus and from Eastern Europe, especially Moldova and Romania, and having tasted the some of the atrocities that can be French wine, that will present a serious competition. And it's also one major disadvantage towards the French is that you can they don't the Moldovans nor the Georgians nor the Romanians for that matter, they don't have to build up stories or other sorts of bollocks in order to sell their wine. The wine is really great, the wine is really cheap, and that's a successful recipe. And okay, there are also the premium versions of wines, those who have certain vintages and those who may be mm, held in storage for 10 years or 12 years or something like that. There's also a market for that. But for the vast majority of people, I don't think that matters exactly. The vast majority of the buyers will be looking at it's good. Is it good? Have we tried it before? Yes, then we're gonna get it again. And when it comes to this, obviously when in the moment when Moldova will be part of the EU, some businesses will be waiting for, just as I mentioned, wineries. But at the same opposite end of the spectrum, if you don't have an established business in agriculture, then your life is going to be much more difficult. And it's also going to be more difficult for those who already have an established business because you have so much extra bureaucracy that you have to take care of, and then if you want to access funding for your farm, the way it works is that you still have to get another way to spend the money, and then the European Union will reimburse you. It's a really ass backwards way of doing it, which is what Moldovan farmers are not accustomed to. They receive um, they receive their credits just as what used to be in Romania. If we're going to support, say, the agriculture industry by offering them cheaper diesel, then we're either going to sell the diesel directly cheaper to them, or they can just simply mm, buy at a preferential price. But buying at a preferential price goes against the EU laws of competing in the single market. So in the end, well, hopefully, at least Moldova has an advantage which Romania didn't have. Everybody who has access to European funds in one way or another, or who actually encountered the EU bureaucracy, well, the most experienced people also happen to speak the same language as you, which are the Romanians. And be sure that it's the same thing happening right now. Now a lot more money will get poured into Moldova in order to prop it up with the so-called pre-accession funds, which are which demand much less compliance than what normal EU funds, which are accessed by in any country which or when it already is a member. And of course, just like anywhere, there's going to be plenty of grifting of those pre-accession funds, but there'll also be some significant sums of money that will actually be invested. How to take in particular, I don't even know where to start. The first two things that Moldova definitely going to take advantage of is to have a civilized rail network, especially and this concerns also both its neighbors, being both Romania and Ukraine, and then a decent road network, because the best piece of road that exists in that country, it's a 30-kilometer piece of road that was built sometime in 2007, if I remember, by the U.S. Marine Corps, and they needed it for a special exercise. But as it is a tradition, they overbuilt it, and they overbuilt it so well that it's still the benchmark of infrastructure performance in that country. And considering that Romania has gotten its shit together, especially when it comes to road infrastructure, that could also be an opportunity that can open up a lot more places and a lot more transit points, and have the decent infrastructure if you want to actually develop your country. And especially when you want to focus at one point on exports, well, okay, you have the port of Giurgiulești, which again, that's still a tiny piece. But what about having a direct rail connection to the port of Constanța, or to have direct rail connection to Bucharest, and other connections which don't concern the capital? If there's one thing that Moldova can do, and is to avoid this mistake of centralizing, especially the economic power around the capital. I understand that well, a lot of the other raions, so districts of Moldova, they're not doing economically great, but at least let them the way they are. Don't rob them of any potential homegrown investments to get sucked up by the capital, especially since the capital starts exhibiting the same issues as any capital, which is overpopulation and the expensive rents. If you want to work there, well, sure, you can find a job, but you're going to be living just like people live here in the London area or in the south of UK. You live if a building or if an apartment or if a house has say 4 rooms, then you're going to find anywhere between 4 to 8 people living inside that house and sharing the same amenities like the bathroom and the kitchen, which is also not a particularly healthy phenomenon. But overall, this is as much as I can say about this. So probably you've hopefully found it informative, and well, for whoever it is interested, well, when it comes to the second turn of the presidential elections on the 3rd of November, I still have an impression that Maya Sandu will be winning because and that's also because well she even if her party is hated, she is still liked sufficiently, even if she had some pretty significant slippages when it comes to foreign policy. While Stoyanoglu, what more can I say about it? There isn't anything more that I can say which I haven't said already about him, about what he wants, about his potential competence, and his and the general lack of extra knowledge. He hasn't made himself different. He hasn't differentiated himself in a certain way in order to be obvious, to at least have a starting point to say, well, at least he did this, well, and so it's at least worth giving him a try, particularly since he comes from the Socialist Party. And when it comes to presidency, the party matters a lot less than it would in any other circumstances, even if the parliament may be changing at the next election, which is a high possibility considering the disastrous performance of past and their sheer arrogance. But it's always good in republics like these for the president to be of a different party and of a different political color than the parliament present then or present in the near future. Moving on now further east, since then there aren't a lot of interesting news aside from the memes of Donald Trump working in McDonald's and other election-related shenanigans. There really wasn't much to discuss about the US. But this concerns the US. CNN. Washington's Arab allies engage with Iran as US efforts to stem Middle East violence falter. Growing unease over the United States' inability to de-escalate tensions in the Middle East is prompting some of Washington's closest Arab allies to significantly increase engagement with its primary regional adversary, Iran. Over the past few months, Arab nations have been leveraging their revived relations with the Islamic Republic to ward off a wider regional war as the US fails to contain an impending regional escalation. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken landed in Israel for his 11th trip to the region in a year on Tuesday in an apparent effort to take advantage of the killing of Hamas leader and October 7 architect Yahya Sinwar to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. US officials, however, are tempering expectations as Washington's calls for calm fall on deaf ears and Israel vows to push ahead with its wars in Gaza and Lebanon. Blinken's visit also comes as Israel prepares a response to Tehran's October 1st firing of hundreds of missiles in one of the biggest ever attacks on the Jewish state. The strike was in response to Israel's assassination of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah last month and its suspected killing of Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran in July. Arab nations have long been suspicious of Shiite Iran's role in a region that is dominated by US allied Sunni states and share Israel's concerns about its support for non-state Islamist groups. For the past month, Tehran has tried to gauge their position on its conflict with Israel, dispatching its top officials and diplomats for an intensive campaign of diplomacy with its neighbors, mainly of whom host the US military personnel and bases. Arab nations that had spent decades brawling with Iran for regional influence are now opting to engage with it again. In a rare meeting this month, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who once called Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei as the new Hitler of the Middle East, sat down with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi in Riyadh. It was the third meeting between Iranian and Saudi officials in 1 month. Tehran's top diplomat also met with Jordan's King Abdullah II in Amman and made a rare trip to Egypt for a meeting with President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in Cairo. He has also met Qatar's Prime Minister in Doha, the Omani Foreign Minister in Muscat, and the Bahraini King in Manama. Those efforts appear to have borne fruit. All our friends gave us assurances that their landed airspace will not be used to attack Iran. We are expecting this from all countries in the region, Aragachi said after meeting Kuwait's Crown Prince Sabah al-Sabah in Kuwait City. Despite seeing an opportunity to weaken Iran's regional influence, Arab nations are now signaling neutrality. The regional source told CNN last week the UAE's airspace will not be used for any strike on the Islamic Republic. The Gulf monarchy's priority is not to be directly involved in a proper regional confederation. They fear they would be targeted and they would end up being directly hit in the crossfire, said Cinzia Bianco, a visiting fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. They think the best way to avoid such a scenario is to make themselves pretty useful interlocutors for both sides and especially Iran, which is the most likely party to attempt hitting them. Israel's actions in Lebanon and Gaza have significantly degraded Hezbollah and Hamas, groups that some Arab states and their media outlets have described as terrorists. While some Gulf Arab states may privately welcome the development, experts say they are very concerned about the potential of significant escalation in regional violence should Israel not be contained. In the immediate sense, Gulf states are not unhappy to see Hezbollah weakened and decapitated, but given how reckless Israel has been and how unclear its strategic goals are in the war, there are broader concerns about how their immediate neighborhood might end up looking once the bulk of the war is over. Hassan al-Hassan, senior fellow for Middle East policy at the International Institute of Strategic Studies in Bahrain, told CNN. The Biden administration's year-long effort to mediate a ceasefire deal in Gaza and contain the violence in Lebanon has failed. The US has struggled to convince Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to de-escalate. Gulf Arab states like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, two of the world's top oil producers, have in recent years steered their foreign policy away from conflict to serve their economic interests, which has seen them repair ties with former adversaries like Iran. But they fear that an uncontained regional war could throw a wrench into their economic ambitions. At this critical juncture, the UAE believes a robust and effective American role is extremely necessary, Anwar Gargash, diplomatic advisor to the UAE president, told CNN this month. We need a ceasefire in Lebanon and Gaza as soon as possible. Gulf Arab nations have come under attack several times from Iran-allied groups have grown skeptical of the US's willingness to protect them if Iran strikes. Saudi Arabia's oil facilities were hit in 2019 in an attack Washington blamed on Tehran, and the Iran-backed Houthi group in Yemen struck Abu Dhabi in 2022. The US did not intervene. The UAE was disappointed by President Joe Biden's de-designation of the Houthis as a terrorist organization soon after he took office, and the US failure to redesignate it in the wake of the Abu Dhabi attacks. The US only reinstated the terror designation this year after a group started attacking shipping in the Red Sea to punish Israel after the 7th of October. The sentiment in the Gulf has certainly shifted, Bianco said, adding that the Gulf monarchies have lost faith in the primary security guarantor, the United States. The shift in sentiment is the result of what Gulf states see as a years-long effort by the US to step back from the Middle East as it moves its focus to China. Still, regional states rely heavily on their military relationship with the US. Saudi Arabia is seeking a formalized security agreement with Washington and the UAE, which hosts some 5,000 US military personnel, is expected to become a major US defense partner. Just a week before Hamas's 7th of October attack last year, the US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said in a discussion at the Atlantic Festival in Washington, D.C., that the Middle East is quieter today than it has been in 2 decades. The amount of time I have to spend on crisis and conflict in the Middle East today compared to any of my predecessors going back to 9/11 is significantly reduced, he said, adding to that the US's efforts were focused on regional integration and normalization with Israel, which could create a greater and more stable foundation as we go forward. So, as you have most likely heard, there are plenty of people in a lot of glowy NGOs, or if they're part of groups related to foreign relations, who have kind of seen the writing on the wall, just as I mentioned it here in this podcast, this being that the Arab oil kingdoms and have been getting closer to Iran, especially since they blockade by the GCC, which lasted up until 2016 or 2017, if I remember correctly. They essentially tried to cut off Iran and Qatar in particular, and Qatar because it was very close to the Iranian regime, but in the end did not exactly help the entire economic situation. And so this effort has been going on for a while, not just because of the lost faith in the United States. Well, the part with losing faith has happened way before this conflict, and especially just as I mentioned, this article says exactly the same thing as I did one podcast or two podcasts ago when the U.S., especially when it comes to Saudi Arabia, signed the security guarantee since the days of FDR. So that would be Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Imagine back in the 1940s, if I remember. They did not exactly hold their end of the deal. And with these stupid plays like de-designating and redesignating powerful groups at the end of the day, such as the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and they're powerful because, well, guess who is funding and providing them with weapons? We see the same thing today. This is not exactly a new strategy. If you know where to look, and if you look exactly at the weapons that either Hamas, Hezbollah, or the Houthis are using, all of them reek of Iranian influence if they're not built by Iran all right. And personally, I can't exactly blame the countries, even if somehow they on the bright side, they did gradually they did normalize relations with Israel, and this is the credit of Donald Trump in particular. And isn't it kind of curious that okay, you could say that Trump may not have wanted to muddle the waters into trying to steamroll the Houthis when they attacked the Saudi refineries in 2019, because the Abraham Accords were still being discussed, and that was his main focus. First, start with the UAE normalizing relationships with Israel, but right now I'm getting an impression that the Gulf states may not exactly want to take chances in the event that a Kamala presidency will be looming over them, since they've already seen firsthand what happens when the U.S. gets cuddly with Iran. See the Obama administration. They saw what sort of naivety is played. See Joe Biden's administration, and right now they would rather not risk getting into Iran's crosshairs if a Kamala presidency were to happen, especially since each country has something to lose significantly. At the end of the day, Kuwait is not exactly very far from Iran. Bahrain is an island which has only one land bridge connection, and that's the King Fahd Bridge to Saudi Arabia. Then you have Iran, then you have Qatar, which is a peninsula, but they've already been longtime buddies of Iran. Where do you think Hamas leadership lived and thrived when they were coordinating rocket strikes or when Gaza was getting bombed into oblivion? They were living in Doha, no, not anywhere else. Well, with a few exceptions later on. And then you have the UAE which still contests some islands which also happen to have oil reserves under them in in the Gulf. And then at the same time, every sort of oil infrastructure in the United Arab Emirates is placed right on the seaside. So the Iranians require one single well-placed rocket to land there, and there you go. You've essentially decapitated the entire country economically. That would be and that would be you bombard the port of Ruwais, which also happens to be the biggest oil refinery over there, because that's one of the main export points of oil from the UAE to the outside world. And these particularities, they've already been explored ever since the first Desert Storm. If by any chance you happen to discuss with a person, especially someone who worked in the oil industry in the Gulf during the first Desert Storm, they will tell you just how hilarious the fire drills were when yeah, you would try as much as possible, especially if you were a refinery worker, to try to defend you first yourself, and then what can be done? Well, anybody with more than two neurons scraping together would realize that well, all these fire drills are essentially useless, because if a single rocket hits us, even if it may be a stray rocket, then we're gonna blow up with the entire district, because it's an oil refinery. It's not like there's water circulating through those towers. You have all sorts of flammable things, from all the way from natural gas down to heavy oils, and not to mention that everything is pressurized. So it's not exactly an exaggeration when I say that if something were to happen, the entire district blows up, because that's what already happened thanks to the Houthis in Saudi Arabia. Overall, this is what I see that the Arab Gulf states are trying to do, is to essentially play both sides and keep whatever relationship or whatever relationship status they have with Israel down on the back burner. They're not like It's not like they're going to ignore it, but for now, Israel is too much of a hot potato in order to handle, especially since well, Mohammed bin Salman has been particularly happy that essentially through the game of Russia and Iran being played with those terrorists in Yemen, Gaza, and Lebanon, they essentially rolled back the normalization negotiations with Israel. On the other side, Iran is also a really important country, not only just by its size, but also through its economy. And it will be just as stupid as as an Eastern European country ignoring the presence of Turkey or the existence of Turkey. Well, Iran is in the same position there, where Turkey for Europe is the bridge towards Asia. Iran for the Middle East is the bridge towards the rest of Asia. Even if yes, there are definitely more ports in the Middle East which have access directly to Asia, and you don't have to cross through a canal or circumnavigate Africa to get there, like it would happen in the case of the Europeans. But well, from a development point of view, they're still way too behind. And well, we got to remember that the Gulf oil states are a bunch of countries that ended up becoming well, almost first world nations in the span of 40, 50 years or something like that. Some lag behind, like Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia also has to also the king also has to contest the with the Islamic clerics in Mecca and Medina. But economically, you're not exactly in a position to have such a diversified economy and also such a powerful economy, which is also not dependent on one of the most important choke points in the world, being the Strait of Hormuz, to exactly try to act like act like the US or act like a larger country in Europe with a lot more economic influence. Because simply you're not there. And this has also never been culturally the way to go, especially since the Gulf oil states understand now that, as we're leaving aside the former tribal conflicts that used to be in the past, right now the world for them is a much larger place and it's a more complicated place. Well, the grudges between the Sunni and the Shiite they will never go in the next millennium. But leaving aside the religion, at least on the brighter side, we hear Jake Sullivan is actually right, and I would believe him that that the Middle East is a quieter place than it used to be in the past, despite what's happening now in Israel. Because, well, let's be honest, who exactly is the most is realistically the most annoying about what's happening with Israel? Well, it's Iran because Iran is essentially seeing its bet on those terrorists to be to not be exactly a winning one. And then you have Syria, where well, not all countries actually care realistically about Syria. And then okay, yes, you have Erdogan in Turkey, who is bitching and moaning about what Israel has been doing. But commercially, if you look at trade volumes and stuff like that, you realize that basically nothing changed. But for that, you need to understand the Ottoman school of diplomacy in order to also first not fall into this trap of believing absolutely everything that Sultan Erdogan is saying. Moving on now. Well, we're going back west, but this also concerns a country in the east, or more like two countries in the east. Wall Street Journal. North Korean troops train in Russia as Moscow deepens war coalition. North Korea has sent hundreds of special forces to eastern Russia for training in recent weeks, according to South Korea's main intelligence agency, as Moscow relies on Pyongyang and other partners, including Iran, to support its war effort in Ukraine. Russian naval vessels transported around 1,500 North Korean Special Forces troops to Russia this month, and Pyongyang has plans eventually to send as many as 12,000 soldiers to assist Russia, according to South Korea's National Intelligence Service. The US and its North Atlantic Treaty Organization allies have warned that dispatching North Korean troops to the front lines in Ukraine would represent a major escalation in the conflict between Moscow and the Washington-led West. Russia has been using growing numbers of Iranian and North Korean missiles as it wages a fierce air war, but welcoming foreign troops onto its soil will represent a new dimension in which Moscow works with its international partners. US officials told the Wall Street Journal that they think a number of North Korean troops are being trained and equipped in Russia, but the evidence isn't definitive, and it is unclear exactly how many have been sent and what they are doing there. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said on Tuesday that South Korean experts would brief alliance officials early next week about North Korea's involvement in the war. South Korean officials, meanwhile, have expressed alarm at the prospect that North Korean troops could gain battlefield experience. The South Korean government Tuesday called the deployment a significant security threat and warned it could take phased measures in response, possibly including lethal aid to Ukraine. South Korea, one of the world's fastest growing weapons manufacturers, so far has declined to sell lethal weapons to Kyiv, providing only supplies such as gas masks and emergency kits. South Korea has sold weapons to countries such as the US and Poland that are supplying Ukraine's military. The Ukraine war, as it grinds through its third year, has strained Russia's manpower and weapon supplies. North Korea and Iran previously had helped address Moscow's hunger for resources by supplying ammunition, drones, and weapons. For Moscow, the presence of North Korean troops adds a new element to the partnerships the Kremlin has cultivated since the start of the war with other countries, which have poured resources into Moscow's war effort and undermined the West on the global stage. The deepening involvement of North Korea and Iran in the war also serves Russian President Vladimir Putin's strategic aims, allowing Moscow to export its tensions with the West to the Middle East and East Asia, where the US traditionally has held more sway. North Korea and Russia haven't confirmed the presence of North Korean troops, but Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said on Monday that cooperation between the two countries wasn't directed against third countries. When Putin flew to North Korea in June to work out the details of an agreement on military cooperation, Pyongyang was ready to offer artillery shells in exchange for food and fuel, analysts said. But, according to a former Russian intelligence officer briefed on details of the pact eventually included a secret clause giving North Korea permission to send the first wave of about 1,000 North Korean soldiers to Ukraine to learn firsthand how to execute a war from Russia's experience there. He said more would follow. For now, most of the North Korean troops are being kept at safe distances from the front line, but are being shown how the Russians handle logistics and frontline tactics while gaining a new understanding of drone warfare, he said. The North Korean troops that were sent recently arrived first in the eastern Russian city of Vladivostok, South Korean spy agency said. Once there, the North Koreans were issued Russian military uniforms, then sent to cities across Russia's Far East for training, the agency said. The North Korean troops could play a variety of roles as missile technicians, frontline soldiers, or even laborers supporting logistics, analysts said. On top of deeper pledges for support and transfer of military technology from Russia, the regime of Kim Jong-un will draw lessons from the army's first-hand observation of modern military tactics and how North Korean weapons operate on the battlefield, analysts say. North Korea is moving closer to the Russian sphere of influence by honoring the recent military treaties signed by Putin and Kim, and taking the chance to learn how to win a war of attrition and grind down on the opposing side with artillery, said Benjamin R. Young, a nuclear security fellow at the RAND Corporation, a think tank based in Santa Monica, California. No drill or exercise can replicate real wartime experience, and this could pay dividends in the event a future conflict plays out in the Korean Peninsula, Young said. North Korea has a history of dispatching soldiers as technicians, who ended up flying jet fighters for the Egyptian Air Force and possibly dozens of soldiers to Syria and Zimbabwe. But deploying thousands of troops for Russia poses risks to the Kim regime, said Fyodor Tertitsky, a North Korea specialist at Kookmin University in Seoul. North Korean soldiers, if deployed onto the front lines, could surrender to Ukraine or escape, but what's more dangerous for the Kim regime is potential ideological contamination, he said. Most of them have never been abroad and have spent their lives inside North Korea's tightly controlled information bubble. It's out of character and highly risky for North Korea, Tertitsky said. It would be hard for Kim to motivate his people to fight in a faraway land without knowing why they're fighting. Russia's use of North Korean troops and weapons mirrors its growing military ties with Iran, which has supplied missiles and Shahed drones to the war effort. While relations between Russia and Iran have waxed and waned for years under Putin, the war has strengthened the ties. Cooperation helps in Putin's efforts to export instability. Putin has an interest in seeing tensions rise on the Korean Peninsula, just as they did in the Middle East, because that means one more conflict for the West to have to deal with, and even less attention, energy, and money for Ukraine, which is their strategic goal, said the senior European intelligence official. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian traveled to Russia this week for a summit of BRICS nations, the bloc comprising of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The leader is planning a separate trip to Moscow to sign what the two countries have referred to as an all-encompassing strategic partnership agreement. The agreement is very important because it should form the basis for further development of relations between Russia and Iran, said Yuri Ilyamin, a senior researcher at the Center for the Analysis of Strategies and Technologies, a Moscow-based defense think tank. Russia already has developed a relationship with Iran's allied militias in the Middle East, which have been escalating violence with Israel since last year's October 7 attack by Hamas. US intelligence agencies have warned that Russia could send the Houthi militants in Yemen advanced anti-ship cruise missiles in retaliation for the Biden administration's support for Ukrainian strikes inside Russia with US-provided weapons. Such a move would sharpen the threat to US warships in the Middle East, where the Houthis have been attacking shipping in solidarity with the Palestinians since Israel invaded Gaza. While Russia's support for Ukraine has been driven by strategic defense interests and what NATO calls shared Western values, Moscow's alliances in North Korea and Iran remain largely transactional, said Alexander Gabuev, director of Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center in Berlin. They're handsomely paid, they can test their hardware, they're provided with combat experience, he said, adding that it didn't mean the relationships don't have staying power. Even if it's transactional, there is no deal the West could offer at this point that would tempt any of them to sell their partners down the river, he said. Well, the article is right when it says that the relationships are mostly transactional. Each country is getting something that it requires most. But that's also why this entire narrative string can also be easily observed. And this article doesn't mention another major player, and that is also China. It just mentioned it when it comes to the BRICS meeting, which I think is still happening as of today in Kazan, in Russia. And while there are more countries which are present, there are some other countries which have not, well, at least whose presidents have not attended the big summit. One of them is Alexander Vucic from Serbia, as I read just this morning. And he provided a pretty legitimate explanation, saying that, well, we also have to be concerned with what relationship we can have with the EU. And on the other side, with BRICS the way it is, well, he kind of delegitimized them because membership in such an organization, well, what exactly did it garner for the Serbians? Well, they got a Belt and Road Initiative loan and investment from China, which they are paying through their noses right now, with also really substandard work being done. Here I'm talking about the rail infrastructure project between Novi Sad and Belgrade, where apparently, yes, it definitely is an improvement to what it used to be, but it was one that came at a really heavy cost. And when at the same time, going back to the transactional argument, well, surely Russia can definitely have a better transactional relationship with a country that it borders directly, which is also not just China, but also North Korea. There's still a tiny sliver if you look on the map where Russia is connected in the Far East with North Korea. North Korea is not blocked entirely by the People's Republic of China at the north border with where the river of Daedong, I think it's called, or something like that. But at the same time, yes, so this article does provide a legitimate point when it says that well, with exporting more instability from Moscow side and from Putin's side into other places, that shifts the focus of the US away from Ukraine, which, as we have seen, that has really happened. Do you remember how the population suddenly shifted from caring about Ukraine, even if the support was truthfully waning, but the support was waning mostly because of the overhype of some things that were propagated through mass media, such as the sanctions, without actually providing explanation that the sanctions are meant to handicap over time the economy of a country by depriving it of certain essential parts and pieces for industry, for example, especially when it comes to Russia, the oil and natural gas extraction industry, which also took the country to the point where even if John McCain, which is a person that he was hated by many people, did say something good about Russia, which is that Russia is a gas station with an attitude. And that's exactly how it continues to behave. But the Russians don't realize this. The Russians haven't realized this because part due to Soviet brainwashing, but also part to the way the populace is. It has never crossed their minds that that not only they are no longer the country that they used to be, but whatever country they remained from the breakup of the Soviet Union and with all the economic shocks that came from that. because suddenly a lot of supply chains were broken up simply because well, whatever factories we had in former USSR states, well, we no longer have access to them. So so this thing will go further, and this war as well has begun as a show of arrogance, especially from the side of Putin. Essentially, how dare the Ukrainians stab us in the back the way they did? Well, without realizing, not exactly without realizing, but never admitting to the fact that they did it first, and they have a historic debt to pay to the Ukrainian people. But going back to this export of instability, and this is again a really good point that the article makes, when when the war with Israel began on the 7th of October last year, suddenly the focus of almost everybody shifted away from Ukraine and shifted to back again towards Israel, Palestine, Hezbollah, Iran, the Houthis, and then everything else that's part of this conflict. And one of the reasons it works so well is that no country's popular opinion is no, it was not because of Israel, but it's another conflict in the Middle East, and everybody since first there's a storm up until now is very wary of a new conflict in the Middle East. And so this was a really good play from Putin's side because well, Iran gets a market to export its Shahed drones and then everything else. But at the same time, it also helps Russia in order to take away the attention span of the people from the West away from Ukraine and back to the Middle East. And from this perspective, there may be some people of you who will say that the global Jewish elite were behind this, but no, they were actually not, considering how hostile Russia has been towards Israel. Because even the Israelis are not stupid at the end of the day, even if the third biggest spoken language in Israel is Russian, and it's Russian because, well, is it I think about a quarter of the Jewish population, if not more, happen to be Jews that lived in Russia and then who migrated in one way or another to Israel. The Israelis aren't stupid, and it's not like they didn't pay attention who exactly is supplying their enemies. But at the same time, though the Israelis are exploiting the golden opportunity to at least to pacify the region, not in a more sustainable way, but in a more long life way, so that if they handicap their enemies right now, the peace that will come from this will be much more long-standing than whatever there has been in the past, without having to again dick around with we're gonna do diplomacy, then we're gonna give something to the Palestinians. Okay, then you can do that with the Palestinians because they're within your own country. But what can you do against Hezbollah, which is a again a terrorist organization funded with a fuck ton of money from Iran, and who are not on your territory, but they still act exactly like the enemies from within your own territory. And let's not even get into the Houthis. Mm, the Houthis themselves, they're also a chimera of their own making. But now, the previous exercises around the Taiwan Strait, which got the Chinese to promise that it was definitely not an attempt at blockading or at least exercising a blockade of Taiwan. Now we have front number 4, the Korean Peninsula all over again. Now to discuss about the Korean Peninsula and the state that it's in right now. At least on the bright side, the South Koreans haven't exactly sat with a thumb up their asses over these decades and piggyback off the military support that the US was offering them, especially since most of that US military support is in the southern part of South Korea, and whatever is not in the southern part of South Korea, you can find that extra support on the islands of Kyushu in Japan. The rest, the rest, let's give credit to the South Koreans, and that's why they are a a country that whose arms industry is booming because they got exactly the best stuff possible when it comes to research and design from the Americans, and there were also other countries like France, but the US in particular, and whatever the South Koreans built, it, first of all, it has to be suitable for their own uses. And as tests have shown, even though they don't have any real world experience as a military, that stuff does work, and it's worth that it works much better than what the North Koreans have. Even if the North Koreans have the capacity to cooperate with China and Russia, you really don't think that, for example, the Romanians and the Polish would have placed such large acquisition orders with the South Koreans if they didn't know that their stuff was actually functional, and it's also similar to what they may have to face in a future which is not so uncertain. And there's also another aspect. You got to remember that both sides of the 38th parallel, so where the Korean War essentially ended, they're some of the most heavily militarized places on the planet. You cannot even imagine the scale. Take, for example, just the North Koreans have about 40,000 pieces of artillery all across the border, including that island west of the Korean Peninsula, whose name I forget right now. But out of those, about 20,000 of them are pointed right at Seoul, the capital, because the capital isn't exactly far from the DMZ, and not being far from the DMZ means that it's also close by to the artillery guns of North Korea. Truth be told, South Korea also prepared the same thing, and that's why when it comes to their own tiny region, the South Korean intelligence services are some of the best because they do have expansive networks of informers and also dedicate a lot of resources into monitoring absolutely everything that the North Koreans are doing because they're conscious of this risk. The North Koreans do not they don't risk getting their capital bombed because the capital isn't this close to the border. But overall, in the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty volatile situation. And any one of these points, if it were to blow up, there is a high possibility that it may end up in a cascade. Say, for example, in the unlikely scenario, but not impossible scenario, if what happens if Ukraine loses the war? And it could be because it could be because simply somehow the assistance will dry up, or they really get ground to a halt in attrition warfare, like the Russians are hoping that they're doing. What if uh, what if a conflagration happens somewhere else? But let's just stick to this point with Ukraine. Say that if Russians were to win, the next the next powder keg that blows up in the world could reliably be either the Korean Peninsula or in the South China Sea with Taiwan. Either of these will be most likely to blow up in the event of such a scenario, particularly because well Kim in North Korea is kind of realizes that he's reaching the limits of how much he can actually fool the population. That the country is so great, and okay, well, the North Korean population is more subservient to the dear leader, but no, but it's not infinitely subservient. Plus, it's not like the North Korean elite are unconscious of how well everybody else who's not a communist country is doing. And this article outlines pretty clearly, and this is definitely a point to worry about North Korean soldiers getting trained by Russia. And let's be honest, there are some North Korean soldiers also in also on the front in Ukraine. It's just that which many haven't found out yet. But if you know where to look, there are plenty of photos which can be geolocated near the border of Ukraine, where you have mixed units of North Koreans and Russian soldiers who also wear a specific patch to identify them as being part of a mixed unit like this. And here I won't blame exactly the South Koreans if they won't send up their own specialists, or if they're not going to start opening up their arms acquisition book to Ukraine as well with this development. And for this development, no, Kim Jong-un can be fully blamed for this because it's an external involvement. It's an external involvement, and seeing how in the last week or so the rhetoric from Pyongyang, especially from not from Kim Jong-un himself, but from his sister, who exhibits the traits of a psychopath through and through, have also become more and more inflammatory. This coupled with the joint exercise of China and Russia, because it wasn't just China that exercised the blockade of Taiwan. There were also Russian ships from the Far East Fleet present there as well, but in a minor supporting role. True, the majority of the job was the PLA Navy and the PLA Air Force. But it's not like the Russians were there just as merely we were just merely passing through. No, it wasn't like that. But it's a volatile situation overall. And but truth be told, if there will be a place to blow up, it won't be in the Middle East, and that will be because well, neither the Israelis aren't interested in in a conflict to grow larger, but at the same time, other Arab states are also not curious into getting involved, considering the fragility of their own economies and militaries. Here I say something specifically for the Saudis and the Emiratis, considering the things that happened, which I shall not speak of, in Yemen, and also the lack of performance in those operations there. Also with the lack of discipline, which was something I kind of understood why there would have been issues with discipline and cohesion, but goddamn, no, nowhere near that level. That needs to be work. That needs a lot of working on too. So that remains either something happens in Ukraine, either something happens in Korea, either something happens when it comes to Taiwan. But what I think is either of the former two have to blow up in order for the Chinese to actually do something when it comes to Taiwan. Speaking of Taiwan, as I mentioned, the blockade already. Reuters: Taiwan says live-fire China drills may be part of a deterrence effect. Taiwan's defense ministry said on Tuesday that live-fire Chinese drills in a province facing the island are part of routine annual drills, but also possibly part of China's deterrence effect in the waters of the Taiwan Strait. China's Maritime Safety Administration, in a notice late Monday, said an area about New Shan Island in Fujian province would be closed off for 4 hours from 9 a.m. on Tuesday for live fire drills. New Shan also sits just south of the Taiwan-controlled Matsu Islands. Taiwan's defense ministry said in a statement that those exercises were part of routine Chinese training and it was keeping a close watch. However, the ministry said it could not rule out that it was part of China's expanding its deterrent effect in conjunction with the dynamics of the Taiwan Strait. It did not elaborate. China last week held a day of war games around the island Beijing views as its own territory it said were a warning to separatist acts. Premier Zhou Zhongtai told reporters in Taipei that China should not be carrying out any such exercises given their threat to regional peace and stability. No matter how large the scale of the drill is, they should not be frequent and close to Taiwan, he said. This will only cause unnecessary tension. Taiwan has complained for the past 5 years of regular Chinese warplane and warship missions in the airspace and around the island. China detests Taiwan President Lai Ching-te, who took office in May, as separatist and has rebuffed his calls for talks. Lai rejects Beijing's sovereignty claims, saying only Taiwan people can decide their future. So this is not exactly unintentionally tied to the previous article, but it still remains to be one of the points where okay, well, the Taiwanese and the rest have been hearing threats and warnings from China against separatism and against the principle of China as a single country. Well, sure. But what's most worrying, and here is where we can relate to another moment in history where someone wasn't exactly, I can't exactly say taken care of, but no, but nobody paid attention to him back then, and with a lack of attention, mm, things ended up disastrously. And here I'm referring to the Austrian painter. If you are to look at the way well, the book and his ideas were treated, they were treated as ridiculous. Well, nobody could have actually done this, and nobody can actually unironically believe this. But he did he did remain consistent ever since the beer hall putsch, all the way until he took power as the supreme chancellor in the late 1930s. And with with the beginning of the war, it appeared in that moment that that a good part of what the Austrian painter was writing in his own book ended up actually becoming part of reality, and that's where everybody got caught off guard. Truth be told, at least people definitely much smarter than us, him especially part of intelligence services in the West, they have grown wary of such signs, and when there is in a country like China, especially when these messages are coming from the other dear leader Xi Jinping, mentioning how the country has to prepare for war, how the country has to prepare for war, and the country has to prepare for war. Okay, there is this running joke about how Chinese threats don't exactly amount to anything, and this is surprisingly a saying which was not invented by the Taiwanese or the Japanese or anybody in East Asia. It was surprisingly a term coined by the Russians ever since the days of the Sino-Soviet split. Because even then, Mao Zedong was threatening war against the eastern part of Russia, and there are still a lot of fortifications where the current Russian Chinese border is, even if the government, the CCP has tried to pretend that never happened. Well, they did. It did happen, and there's clear evidence on the ground in that area. Just look at the number of bunkers. It's okay. It's nowhere near Albania tier, but those bunkers have been placed there because Mao was really paranoid that at one point, if he went too far with his threats, he could actually get invaded. by the Soviet Union. So, but getting back to this, the rhetoric of we're preparing for war has been going on for a bit too long, and this is also coupled with larger and larger and more daring exercises carried out by China. Just as I mentioned, and sadly this article doesn't mention the previous exercise where they simulated the blockade of the entire island of Taiwan. Now it's true that reading this article, those live fire drills have been routine for at least 3 years. That's true. But it's not just what's happening at an operational level, but also the tone in which those things are happening. And this is tied to the commentary on the previous article. South China Sea and Taiwan, they are a potential powder keg. They're a potential powder keg, but we don't. But just like with the Korean Peninsula, we don't know if that powder keg has has a fuse on itself, if it can blow by itself, or if it's a pre-programmed fuse in case something else blows up in the world, that one could also get triggered by the specified event. And it will be a really dangerous ordeal if we were to discover what exactly would be the thing that blows up the entire party. But at least it's optimistic that the South Koreans are taking a more serious involvement in the worldwide stage. Japan has been doing it already. Just yesterday, looking for the news articles, I've read that for the first time in history, an F-35B has landed on what the Japanese call a helicopter carrier, but in reality, it's a VTOL aircraft carrier. Here I'm talking about the IJN Kaga. But there's still time, and I don't exactly want to be the guy to put the question of how much time does East Asia, for example, or Southeast Asia have, how much they have time left until they can build a cohesive partnership in case shit blows up in that part of the world. Especially since we take into consideration that shit blowing up there will look dramatically different compared to that shit may be blowing up in the Middle East. In the Middle East, in one way or another, the oil will still flow. But if shit blows up in Southeast Asia, and especially if it's something that concerns China, well, there goes a good part of the manufacturing capacity of the planet. Then also the entire semiconductor industry will go tits up because in order to operate a supply chain for semiconductors, trust me, without globalization, that could not have been possible. Not at the prices that semiconductors are right now, and more so how dependent the entire world has become of semiconductors. And then you also have some other adjacent industries that may end up getting definitely affected by this. Especially since, well, there aren't exactly many countries on the planet that can make microprocessors and not cutting-edge microprocessors, leaving aside the blatant lies of companies like Xiaomi and Huawei and whatever semiconductor foundries there are in China. They're still several generations behind, and with every generation of shrinking the dies of the microprocessors, they have a disproportionately expensive more job than they would simply because they do not have access to technologies which are employed in the field in order to create them at least a reasonable-ish price. So a price that will not exactly mm, uh, bombard your budget. That's why it's stuff blowing up in Asia. It's a major concern. Imagine your DJI drones go down the shitter. Any sort of microprocessor which is made by TSMC is going to go down the shitter. Then you're also going to have NVIDIA itself going partially down the shitter since they rely on TSMC. So those are already two bundled up together. And if something happens in South Korea, then okay, Samsung is a gigantic industry conglomerate. But do you really think that in the case their existence matters? They're going to turn away from the rest of the world and they're going to focus on the home front. So and that means no more mobile phones, no more microprocessors for mobile phones because Samsung also makes those. You're not even going you're most likely not even going to get RAM sticks or even flash memory since since the biggest flash memory manufacturer is Samsung in South Korea. Now you understand the scale of the fuck up if something were to blow up in Southeast Asia or East Asia, whether it's the Korean Peninsula or if it's something concerned with Taiwan. That's something which the countries in that area they're really about. They're also conscious of the fact that their military knowledge is nowhere near as competent as it is in the case of Europe and the US, who still fought some wars even in recent history. And overall operations would be completely disastrous because here we're talking about thousands of islands, peninsulas, a lot of other islands, a lot of it has to be a lot of naval logistics involved. And we've seen that even when a country is competent in the logistics aspect, there are still some fuck ups here and there because it's nowhere near a perfect, it's nowhere near a science. It's an art form. It's an art form with a lot of perspiration behind it. Moving on now, since we were still talking about China, South China Morning Post. More than 60% of Chinese over 60 are empty nesters, survey finds. Most can't afford to live in a nursing home, according to five-yearly poll, as Committee on Aging calls for better services and coordinated policies. Nearly 60% of people aged 60 and over in China are empty nesters, an increase of more than 10 percentage points in a decade, and most say they cannot afford to live in a nursing home, according to a nationwide survey. The poll, conducted every 5 years by the Ministry of Civil Affairs, found that people in the age bracket were also less dependent on their children. The average number of children per household dropped by 0.6 over the decade to 2021 to 2.6 children as a result of the one-child policy introduced in the late 1970s. Some 130,000 people aged 60 and above took part in the survey in August 2021. It also found that nearly half of those willing to live in nursing homes could afford to pay up to 1,000 yuan, so that will be 140 US in monthly fees. That will put most aged care facilities out of reach in China's big cities like Beijing and Shanghai, where the cost is more than 5,000 yuan a month. China's traditional way, relying on children to support their elderly parents, is being seriously challenged, the National Committee on Aging, which is affiliated with the ministry, wrote in the survey report released last week. The rapid growth of the empty nest elderly population calls for better care services and coordinated policies to improve their well-being. The world's second-largest economy is grappling with an economic slowdown and the mounting pressures of a rapidly growing population alongside a shrinking workforce. In 2023, the number of people aged 60 and above reached 297 million, accounting for more than 21% of the total population, according to official data. The population aged 65 and over exceeded 217 million, making up 15.4% of the total. The Economist Intelligence Unit forecast earlier this year that the proportion of people above the age of 60 would account for nearly a third of China's population by 2035. The latest survey also showed a huge gap in annual incomes of people in the over 60 age group living in urban and rural areas. For urban dwellers, the average was 47,000 yuan compared to just 14,000 yuan for those in rural areas. Pensions are the major source of their incomes, but with the main state pension fund expected to dry up by 2035, the government is encouraging people over 60 to work. The health status of older people has been improving, the report said. An increasing number of younger seniors, those aged between 60 and 69, are getting jobs. Around 19% of people in that age bracket were employed as of 2021, 8.8 percentage points higher than 5 years earlier, the survey found. The National Committee on Aging released a set of guidelines last month for an initiative called Silver Age Action that was introduced 2 decades ago to encourage elderly Chinese to take up volunteer work. Under the new guidelines, local authorities are being urged to help older volunteers take part in childcare, senior care and disability assistance, as well as provide support for disadvantaged and left-behind children who remain in rural areas while their parents go work in the big cities. Zhao Yuwen, 62, who lives with her husband in the eastern province of Jiangsu, said she did casual work for restaurants, preparing food and cleaning every day from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. to help support her son's family, though they did not live together. In the afternoon, there's still time for family chores, she said. I didn't earn much, but it makes me feel good that I can help my son. These days, young people are having a hard time because the economy is bad. She said she could not imagine living in a nursing home when she gets older. I definitely can't afford to spend thousands of yuan a month either, she said. I'll just stay at home. Well, isn't this exactly surprising? And even more so, we gotta pay attention to this detail. Whenever you hear about something from Chinese statistics, you always have to assume that the situation in reality is much worse than what they are reporting. Simply because with Chinese culture being one of two faces, and especially the side, the face that you show to the outside has to look brand spanking clean. This admission of a problem is also significantly downplayed, although we don't know by how much. But seeing how it was just about a few tens of thousands of pensioners who most likely happened to be living in one of the bigger cities of China, you can imagine that the situation in the rural areas, it's also much worse. And okay, even if China does have a good level of urbanization, that still doesn't show, and then this article just only a tiny bit touches on the economic disparity between a pensioner that lives in a city and then a pensioner who lives in the rural areas. And as we have seen, the difference is pretty stark when it comes to income. And when it comes to the culture aspect, I find it highly doubtful that this fashion with sending your grandparents to the nursing home will catch up. Once weighing, yes, the economic aspect, sending your grandparents to a nursing home is an expensive ordeal, and when the young Chinese people aren't doing too great financially, mostly because they've been duped by the government. Here, the government is also at fault for this. They focused into sending people to universities in order to prepare them for white-collar jobs, and those white-collar jobs have not exactly come, and which left a lot of people who finished universities to end up working as average laborers in factories, especially in what factories you can consider that remained post-pandemic, at least functioning in China. Then again, as I was saying, with the cultural aspect, the Chinese culture is not one where you can I can't exactly say you abandon, but where you somehow try to get rid of the responsibility of taking care for your grandparents when they are of older age. Okay, it cannot exactly happen like it does in India, where where essentially the extended family moves under one big house. Because, well, if you live in the urban areas of China, China is famous for having shoebox-sized apartments or even literal pods where youngsters sleep in, because getting a rent to have even the most reasonable amount of space is something which can get pretty expensive up to ridiculously expensive depending on the city that we're talking about. chief in those rankings are Hong Kong and Beijing, where the space is at a premium, and you definitely don't have enough space for an extended family. The vast majority of Chinese people are not making that much money, and also living costs are completely different. Plus, with thanks to the one-child policy, this is again something that I will stress upon this fact. It's just barely began biting China as a country by the arse. It's gonna get even worse from now on. It's gonna get even worse. And well, from some perspective, here we can see what people that lived under communism know it as descurcarism, or getting along with the circumstances. Well, that at least a good part of Chinese pensioners realize that I'm not getting good that great of a pension, so I might get into an occupation where I can make some extra money, even to keep myself or to assist my kids in one way or another, or my grandkids. But it remains to be seen if this will be replicable to at least a good chunk of the pensioner population. With the Chinese also suffering from this phenomenon that we call pride, they could all I would bank more on this rather than on a part of the Chinese pensioner population returning to work in one way or another, even if it's part-time work. They could just simply say, I did work for so many years, and I had to suffer through so many other things. And now I just want to enjoy my retirement and sit at home and do nothing. And when the same mentality has been cultivated about entitlements in China, just as it happened in other countries that have gone through this through this really absurd existence that was under communism, you can't exactly blame them, and it will be impossible to turn them around from their ideas, unless their situation gets that bad. But even then, it won't. At least what the Chinese can do, and this is one of their cultural aspects which has been propelled forward to the new generations. This idea that in case things go bad in the cities, then you can always return to the rural areas and live on subsistence farming. But even that one, I'm not exactly so sure about it, since people that moved in the cities and who live for quite a long time in the cities, it doesn't even have to be so long. Even 5 years of living in a city within the same country can change not only who you are as a person, but also your expectations when it comes to life. I highly doubt that what's the young working age population today, if something dramatic were to happen with the Chinese economy, they would just grow and get back to farming rice paddies. Because just like the Russian population within Russia, they've grown accustomed to a certain standard of living. And dropping off that standard of living, even if you are a resilient nation, which the Chinese tend to be, otherwise they couldn't have mm, they couldn't have continued existing for 5,000 years through the governments that they had, through the kings that they had, and through the civil wars that they had. Uh, you know, let's just see a simple civil war if it happens in China, then you get to the level of deaths comparable to an entire continental war within Europe. That's the scale of the population that we're talking about. Also, we have to look at this just what Mao Zedong did with the Great Leap Forward. So the subsequent famine, and the uprooting of the population, and the cultural revolution, and the famines that resulted from the Great Leap Forward. That event in itself killed more people than World War II ever did, to put it into perspective. So Overall, the situation demographically in China is not looking great, and and even with these subtle admissions that the situation isn't going too great, it presents a more worrying sign. And this is where I'll go back to the idea that I've mentioned in other config-related commentaries in the previous podcasts. Demographics also plays a big role in into all of this. Xi Jinping, just like Vladimir Putin, aren't exactly stupid to ignore ignore this aspect. If they want to wage a war for whatever reason, because the reason they're going to justify for themselves a reason. But in order to wage any war, you need to have you need to first have a strong base of healthy people, especially healthy men. But also healthy women are important because how would you replace the population of all the men that will die in a certain war? Which China it's slowly ticking down, and it's ticking down faster than everybody thinks it does. And so I can't exactly bank on the fact that the CCP will just suddenly forget that Taiwan exists and things will just be left as they are. We're not gonna like them, and then we're also going to pretend that they don't exist because that's also not conducive to not exactly conducive, but that's also not representative of Chinese culture and their feelings of ownership of things and places. Because they used to be so many centuries ago the domain or part of Greater China thanks to some king or ruler or whatever. And the more the situation with demographics worsen, the more the pressure will be on the CCP to act in a certain way in order to achieve, in order to at least try to achieve this. Otherwise it's going to lead to and this is also another possibility when it comes to China, a societal implosion that will lead again into a civil war, and we're going to have again tens of millions of people dead, if not more, this time, because weapons have gotten more efficient than they used to be during times like the Taiping Rebellion. And well, it's not going to be a great situation anyways. But I don't possess a crystal ball, and I don't think nobody else does possess a crystal ball. We don't know what will be happening in that moment. But that's the reason why we do the things that we do now is to if it comes to happen, at least have some sort of preparation on hand. Continuing on, and with the last article, The Guardian. Now we're going to Australia. Even wealthy Australians are avoiding GP visits as cost of living hurts access to healthcare. New South Wales Council of Social Services report finds dramatic increase in number of people delaying or not seeing GP due to cost, GP being general practitioner. Even wealthy Australians are cutting back on doctor's appointments due to the cost of living, with new data showing the proportion of people in New South Wales who put off a GP visit because it was too expensive increased by 246% over the past 4 years. A new New South Wales Council of Social Services report, based on the modelling of Australian Bureau of Statistics data by researchers at the University of Canberra, found healthcare had become less accessible for more people. Those on low incomes still struggle the most to see a doctor. There was a 301% increase in the proportion of this demographic who delayed or avoided a GP visit due to the cost between 2020 and 2024. But the proportion of people in middle and high incomes delaying or avoiding the GP has also increased significantly by 243%. The researchers drew from the 2023 patient exercise survey contained within the ABS's multipurpose household survey, as well as original data estimations they produced. They found a dramatic increase in the proportion of people delaying and not seeing a GP due to cost from 2.8% in 2020 to 9.5% in 2024. In 2020, proportionally 2.8% of New South Wales residents skipped a GP appointment because of the cost. This increased to 9.5% in 2024. People on low incomes attended an average of 5.7 GP appointments in 2020. In 2024, this fell to 4.8 appointments. The report draws on the most recent census data to set low-income threshold at $540 a week in 2021 dollars. It presents all other results as medium/high income. The NCOS Chief Executive Officer Kara Varian said more people weren't seeing the doctors because of the increasing cost of medical services, propelled in part by the dearth of bulk billing GPs, as well as in inflation in other areas such as energy. It's been really clear through this research that the reduction in access that's been driven by cost is actually being felt across all income levels, which was not the case 4 years ago, she said. People's ability to spend money on healthcare is reducing. The NCOS report found that people in New South Wales living outside of Sydney were likely to put off seeing both GPs and specialists, and that their experiences were worse the further away they lived. Although the number of visits to specialists and the proportion of people waiting longer than acceptable have remained relatively stable overall, experiences with delays due to costs worsened significantly, the report said. In 2020, people in regional New South Wales attended an average of 1.3 specialist appointments a year. In 2024, this fell to 1.2. While this was a difference of only 5.3%, the portion of patients in regional New South Wales who said they had delayed or not seen a specialist due to costs rose by 202%. In 2020, proportionally, 7.9% of regional residents delayed or didn't see a specialist due to costs. This increased to 24% in 2024. Varian urged the New South Wales government to improve workforce planning to attract more doctors and dentists to the country and to improve patient transport options. People who are in regional and rural New South Wales that are experiencing poverty are less likely to have private health insurance, and are also less likely to be able to access the primary health care or specialist care that they need, she said. Emma Warren, a Newcastle resident who lives with the chronic inflammatory bowel condition Crohn's disease, said she has struggled to afford GP visits since her doctor had to stop bulk billing in December 2022. Warren, an academic whose illness prevents her from working full-time, said it was also very difficult to book GP and specialist appointments at short notice because doctors were in short supply. She said she was constantly worrying about how to afford medical appointments, medication, and food while on disability support pension. There's weeks I'm surviving on toast and ham sandwiches, she said. Warren said the state and federal governments should work together and make bulk billing a major policy focus. I can't afford private health cover, but I shouldn't need it as a disability pensioner, Warren said. What are they doing so people like me can afford to see a doctor as much as they need to? Bulk billing is where a GP accepts only a Medicare rebate as payment for an appointment, making it free instead of charging a patient an extra gap fee. Australia has lost more than 400 dedicated bulk billing GP clinics from 2023 to 2024, according to Guardian Australia analysis. Well, am I not exactly shocked that the penal colony, who had some of the most draconian measures during the pandemic, also found a way to not only uh, fuel the coffers of the public health establishment. How do you think, and why do you think that the conditions of the living in the pandemic were so oppressive there? It was also because, of course, a lot of money has been discovered and fuel and funneled into uh, provincial public health. But at the same time, they also screw up with these with these essential sorts of services, particularly for the people who need, who automatically make them poorer. I haven't exactly seen the justification as to why the Albanese government, because they were in power when they changed the law. What exactly was the motivation behind it, especially with the shortage with the doctor shortage that the Australians experience now already. When it comes to nurses, the vast majority of nurses in Australia happen to be from Indonesia or Philippines, but Philippines mostly. If not, they also come from India. When it comes to doctors, I've even seen in London on the tube you find advertising for if you're a doctor, then you get really generous sums of money to move to Australia. plus and that's just a relocation fee, not to mention the salaries that you're going to get. But then, that's all pointless if at the end of the day they're not moving there, and also the people are not exactly stupid. They're not moving there because they're not getting paid enough, but when you get into a system, and especially in a system like public healthcare, it's like you're entering a cartel. And okay, you're not going to get hunted down if you are to leave the cartel and move somewhere else. Well, let's be honest here. Plenty of people from Arab countries that finished their medical universities here in the UK went to command really absurd salaries in the Middle East. And by absurd salaries, I mean a cardiologist could make with a relatively relaxed working schedule, anywhere upwards of 15,000 pounds a month, tax free, mind you. So in the end, it's a complete clown show what's happening in Australia. And and to pour more salt in the wound, many people may be saying that because of the Albanese government getting rid of this system of bulk billing uh, has been has been a problem. But at the same time, how much of this issue is it also because people have seen just how draconian the medical establishment is during the pandemic, which again, it's recent history. When it comes to Australia, Australia still had restrictions, I think, up until the end of 2022. So the rest of the world, the rest of the planet moved away from the pandemic, and Australia and New Zealand still had restrictions in one way or another. There is the major ones. They still had them well into 2022, and in 2023, if I remember, Australia still discovered that they had some ridiculous restrictions on when it comes to people entering, which dated from the times of the pandemic. And so yeah, it's overall a pretty terrible situation if you are to be living in Australia, or at least existing in Australia, because you can't exactly call it life there. Which okay, if you work in a certain job and you're pretty much employed a mercenary mindset, well, props to you. You already know what's your purpose there, and you know what you need to do in order to not in order to at least progress into what exactly do you want to end up doing in the future. But in order to continue living under such a system, so the system not only robs you of your money because, well, we had a pandemic. Now it not only went full draconian on you by chasing you because you were walking your dog outside of a certain area. Not even the medical establishment knew what they were doing. Kind reminder the previous article commented in the previous podcast. So that's not only the government in order to cut down on the costs, because of course huge costs were incurred in order to play pandemic theater. They, in their attempt to cut the costs, they also managed to screw over the most vulnerable of the people who have already paid into the system. And then it continues on. So you not only screw the more impoverished ones, but then you also screw over even those who can afford by having to avoid the system because you essentially screwed it up. And continuing on with the overall shortage of doctors, that's not going to be resolved anytime soon. And the final straw remains remains again the people. And the people cannot exactly be blamed that they wouldn't be going to the GPs and the specialists. Okay, I don't exactly think that if you were to go to a proctologist, you would have a specifically strong emotion about him because he was most likely not part of the entire pandemic theater. But he's still part of the same cartel. He's still a medic and a doctor like the rest of them. Well, where exactly was he? Where exactly were other specialists? okay, who did not exactly have to do anything with the pandemic, but where exactly were they in order to at least provide some sort of temperance within their cartel? Maybe we shouldn't go that far because still we have to care about something called our reputation. Mm, let's not even get into the fact that when it comes to Australia, a news media outlet does more research and inquiry than the government itself is doing when it comes to why was the pandemic theater so badly managed, and how it was so polarizing and how it was so brutal. When obviously the government is most interested in forgetting that such a thing has happened, in the hope that all the horrible things that the government, both the federal and the provincial governments, have done will be forgotten, but they won't be. But they haven't realized that yet. They'll realize in the future. Yeah, overall, a shitty existence to be in Australia. We joked about it being a penal colony, but it appears that the lifestyle of a penal colony isn't exactly something that disappeared from the origins of the country, where you are essentially turned into a slave to the goodwill of the government because you suffer from a disease, but you as a disabled person, and let's be honest, there aren't that many disabled people even in Australia, even if the conditions have gotten laxer and laxer of what's considered a disability. There's still there's still not that many people that do benefit from the system, and even those people you screw them over. Not to mention the rest of the other people who do not have issues like these, who you also screw them over. So yeah, um, the Australian government, the warden, is the people, the prisoner population. But at least you're not exactly a full-time prisoner because you are still allowed, although at high costs, because you have to fly from that country if you want to go anywhere. At least, no, at least nobody's stopping you to move someplace else. So that's at least one good thing. This is about it from the 15th episode of the Victor News Network. As you probably have seen, it's slimmer in the news. It's also to for me to produce something and make it sustainable, both in terms of energy expensed in recording it, but also having to focus on other commitments because just as I was saying at the beginning, well, I took that break last week because I really needed it to concern myself with other real world things. And at the same time, although as much as I would enjoy making longer podcasts, those will be coming at one point. But this is about the time. This is about the time span if I were to do it alone, somewhere between the 2 to 3 hour mark, in order to keep it at least sustainable for myself as well. Just as a simple reminder, donations are open via Ko-Fi only. You don't need to make an account from what I've seen if you are to donate there. So there goes one less of your concerns, and I'm really glad that Ko-Fi, compared to Buy Me a Coffee and others, do not ask you to make an account if you are to be donating. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good weekend, and see you next time. Cheers.